All right, we're after dark.
So Barb, I think we wanted to spend the next period of this meeting talking a little bit about the inorganic supplement, the draft inorganic supplement. And I wanted to begin this conversation by telling you a little bit about CPT, the history of supplements, and why we're trying to revise supplements across the disciplines and areas right now. Um, so previously, the CPT had created these supplements in various areas, as Michelle described, that are core to the guidelines. So analytical, physical, inorganic, organic, biochemistry, these sort of supplements that tell people what a curriculum in this area might look like. One of the main reasons the committee felt strongly that it was time to update these is in some of the previous supplements, it got prescriptive about what should be taught, and there were often battles about what topics should be included where. And I think from a philosophical perspective, CPT didn't feel the supplement should be prescriptive in telling people what to teach and where to teach it in their curriculum, but rather be more philosophical documents, guiding documents, Barbara, and documents that contain resources for practitioners in the discipline that they can rely on to help build their curriculum. Is there anything else you want to add, Barb, about the way that we approach this? We really want this to be more of a resource and less prescriptive.
Yeah, I think that's great, Cora. And that really highlights what we wanted to do. We really wanted this to be more of a philosophy about how you could think about an inorganic course and kind of what the nature of inorganic chemistry is without defining so much of the topics. I think everybody probably remembers the last inorganic supplement, which I think went on for about 2 pages of experiments you could do and topics that you should cover. And we've got a lot of information from the survey work from, gosh, that's a decade ago now. That's hard to believe about what people are teaching in inorganic chemistry and the recognition that it is such an institutional, it has such a strong institutional context. It's really different at every school. I might teach sophomores, you might teach seniors, my students might have Gen Chem, your students might have PChem, organic, and even analytical chemistry. So because of that, that's another reason why it's so important to think about this from a broader perspective. So Cora has posted in the document, I see a lot of people jumping in there, which is fantastic, that we have put together a draft of the new supplement. And I guess, Cora, should we just kind of talk through just the generals of each section? Maybe we can alternate or something. Um, the first one is just about inorganic chemistry. And what we tried to do is to put together a broad overview of the field. What are the fundamental ideas like periodicity, electronic structure, bonding theories, structure reactivities, and the idea that in the inorganic course, students are dealing with multiple models, which isn't necessarily a case in some of the other courses. And also to put it in context about how it's more broadly important in the chemical sciences. So Cora, I'll leave the next one.
Sure. And so I think it's important, again, to reiterate that we're not trying to prescribe content, especially if you're only teaching a 1 semester foundational course. And just so everyone in this room knows, often what we see is, we do see a number of programs that only offer 1 semester of inorganic. They only cover the foundational course. So again, we're trying not to be prescriptive, but rather describe some of the larger topics that might be included, including atoms and electronic structure, different bonding models, transitional metal complexes, coordination chemistry, acids and bases and solvents, symmetry and group theory. And something we think is really important is that we don't lose this idea of scale in inorganic chemistry. Like another thing that we see is often 1 semester foundational courses will largely be molecularly based, and we think it's important for thinking about including solid state chemistry, nanoscale, and sort of surface science as well. Barb, do you want to?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that is emphasized, is it emphasized here or another section? No, it's in here as well. This idea, sometimes institutions feel try and make it like a general chemistry course, and there is sometimes an issue with just calling a course inorganic and using a general chemistry textbook. So we've tried to be very clear in here that this isn't a catch-all for what you didn't cover. This isn't a general chemistry course. This is actually a course in inorganic chemistry. And so that second semester, as Michelle talked about when she had her in-depth boxes that were did not tell you what subject. There are so many ways that you can teach that in-depth course. You can have that survey course that augments what you did in the foundation course, or it could be just another topic. And when we put this together, we actually decided to go with the subdivisions in the Division of Inorganic Chemistry. You'll notice that when you look at those, they're there other than main group, but we felt that that was an important thing to keep in the this document because it was in the prior one. And we also have the encouragement that students should have a second semester because, like Michelle believes everyone should have 2 semesters of PChem, we believe everyone should have 2 semesters of inorganic chemistry. But the guidelines aren't that prescriptive, so it is a suggestion.
Any comments on this thus far? Initial thoughts, impressions? So I guess I'll.
I have a question. So I know that for these upper level courses, a lot of places teach various courses that are really cross different subdisciplines of chemistry or whatever. And I'm sure a little bit on a course by course basis, you'd probably have to decide if that would count as in depth in any one subdiscipline or whatever. So for inorganic, if somebody's teaching a course that's you know, group theory and symmetry, group theory, bonding, and then moving on into computational chemistry. At what point in time, I mean, how do you sort of decide if it's enough inorganic or not to count as in-depth inorganic, or does it just in general count as an in-depth course? You know,
Yeah, great. It's a great question, Joanne. And the definition of in-depth is it just has to have a foundation course as a prerequisite, not just general chemistry. So as Michelle pointed out,
yeah.
it really doesn't matter what the topic is. That's left up to each individual institution. But that foundation course, that's the one where you do need to have coverage of what is considered the core of inorganic chemistry to make sure it's covered. We don't worry about coverage of particular things in the in-depth course. It's in the foundation course where that
So,
ABIO.
so if a student did 4 in-depth courses that were PChem, and Michelle would be thrilled, um, would that be okay?
It's a personal opinion is
Yeah, right.
a disservice to the students.
Yeah,
Not that PChem isn't fantastic, but and I like PChem.
me too.
But there's nothing that prohibits you from doing 4 courses in PChem or 4 courses in inorganic or 4 courses in biochem.
And I mean, at that level, they're going to be richly interdisciplinary anyway, so I'm not too worried about it actually.
Yeah, the only other place that ABIOP plays a role other than foundation is in the lab experiences.
Hmm.
So we want students to have a lab experience in 4 out of those 5. So
Okay.
even if you had 4 in-depth PChem courses, you'd have to give them the lab experiences probably at the foundation level, since that's where the ABIOP comes in. So that's the other place that we look for subdiscipline, I guess, even though there's many subdisciplines in chemistry.
And I'll just add, since we're sort of talking about meeting the guidelines in the in-depth coursework section, that a really common approach we see, and again, if you've seen the way one institution teaches inorganic chemistry, you've seen exactly how one institution teaches it, because it is the most variable, I think, of all the courses that we see. But But when we are talking about the in-depth coursework, one approach we've seen is that some institutions will have a foundational sort of general inorganic chemistry course that sort of covers what you would expect. And then for the in-depth coursework, it might be a bioinorganic course, or it might be an inorganic nanomaterials course, or it might be organometallic chemistry, something where they're using those principles from the foundational course and really in that second semester applying all that foundational knowledge to one specific subdiscipline. That being said, there are departments and programs that do like sort of a tradition, I don't want to say traditional, but like an inorganic 1 foundational course and then an inorganic 2 that is really, a look at all of these different sub disciplines of inorganic. And again, I just want to reiterate. Oh, go ahead, Barb.
Oh, I just was making a comment. The good old kitchen sink course. You got everything in there.
Exactly. Barb, do you want to talk a little bit about the prereqs?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, there, other than general chemistry, there are no standard prereqs for inorganic chemistry, but we did decide to put in what the most common routes we see at institutions are. So general chemistry only is very common. General chemistry and 1 or maybe 2 semesters of organic is another common one. And then the post PChem course, which does not have to include organic, but usually does, and of course includes general chemistry. And this gives institutions the flexibility to keep the flexibility that they already have in their inorganic curriculum. So the committee, the ACS is agnostic as to like what the prerequisites are. It's a foundation course, even if it has 2 semesters of PChem as a prerequisite.
Any questions about that or that approach? Because again, we see institutions that position inorganic throughout the undergraduate curriculum.
Quick one. So if it's counted as a foundation course, why do you need the other courses as prereqs? Right. I understand that some schools have them as prereqs, but realistically, why can't it just be simplified to Gen Chem and move on?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chip. And Barbara, if you don't mind, I'll take the first stab at this. It's largely because we see some programs that actually have at least 1 semester of PChem as a prereq for inorganic. And it's just because the level that they start teaching it at, they expect students to have that first semester PChem background to be successful. That's not the case everywhere. So I understand your question because it's foundational. Why shouldn't it just be Gen Chem? And it's really, I think, about where you position this, in your scaffolded curriculum, what you want the prereqs to be. And ultimately, I think the prereqs should be based upon, we hope it'll be based upon the courses you think the students need to have background in to be successful in the material.
Yeah, I think the word foundation is kind of a misnomer because it does imply that they are the very foundation, but your first exposure to inorganic past Gen Chem is usually an upper level class, right? It's not going to happen. You do the organics next and then the PChems and then you do your inorganics. And so most times we see prerequisites for those courses, even though they're termed as foundation. So I do think it's just a bit of a misnomer. And we correct it quite often when people say that their inorganic class is the in-depth class because it is an upper level course. So,
But it still just seems to me you could just say at a minimum 2 semesters of Gen Chem.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
why list everything else? Everyone's got the freedom to do what they want, but
I think the reason it's in this document instead of just the 2 semesters of Gen Chem is just because if people are looking for guidance as to where it should be or could be in their curriculum, this provides you some information about what other programs are doing without having to jump into the papers about this. But I mean, yeah, it does only require that, and maybe we should have a stronger statement. The only prerequisite for inorganic chemistry is the general chemistry sequence. However, some institutions choose to add additional prerequisites, and these are what they are.
I think some clarification there would be good. And even if you were to just say, to explain what Michelle kind of explained about how foundation isn't necessarily the right word there. Because there are a lot of places that ours used to be more of a upper level course, and it's not really now, but it's also not quite what Barb does, which really is truly a foundation course that they teach. It's sort of halfway in between those two, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, we can definitely try to add, right, Barb, we actually talked about that when we were drafting it, adding a description. So I've made a note and we'll take a stab at that. And then, sorry, I have to get back to the supplement. Suggested content and best practices for inorganic chemistry. I mean, inorganic is such a broad field. I think it's important that people don't try to cover all the possible topics. However, to develop a deeper understanding of the field that can be applied to new systems when encountered, courses should focus on underlying themes, again, such as periodicity, bonding, energetics, reactivity, structure property relationships across the periodic table. And again, this idea that we want folks to think about inorganic chemistry dealing with substances encompassing a range of scales, and being sure to include some examples of nanoscale and extended systems whenever possible. Using different models, making predictions, and constructing chemical explanation should be a key outcome of inorganic coursework. And again, I think this folds back to this idea of we really want students to be comfortable applying different models and thinking about systems with different models. And we also just add this comment that a course in inorganic chemistry, should provide students with opportunities to engage with the modern chemical literature and including examples, recent examples from the literature, is one way to engage students and make connections.
I'm curious if the ACS exams then are going to be adjusted in some way, because I found the ACS exams I use from 2014 have more topics than I can cover in one semester. The students are never going to be prepared for that exam, despite my best efforts.
The exams is totally separate from the committee, and it's its own arm of ACS. And I'm sure there are people in this room who can speak about that much more eloquently than I. Jacob, I'm going to just speak from personal experiences and someone who was involved with those exams. They were designed to be used by the broad array of courses that are taught in this country, but there was no expectation that anyone would cover all of the content in those exams. I used those exams in my inorganic courses, both the foundation and the standard inorganic, and I don't cover anywhere near content that's in them. And I let my students know that it's not the expectation that you're going to know everything in these exams. I'm looking at the things that we've covered in our course.
And I know Jeff's going to jump in, but I also wanted to say, I make sure Jacob knows that that there is a foundation exam that definitely makes a shift in the right direction compared to the old regular inorganic exam, and it does not have term symbols on it or anything like that. So nothing wrong with term symbols, but
That's what I'd rather have in there.
Say, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, so I live in a state where social media is flooded by people who work for a brand and a company that they're not allowed to speak about. So allow me to put this disclaimer. I used to work for the company. I, however, do not speak for the brand or the company while I'm here. ACS exams and ACS CPT are two different entities. Although there is the mistake that people think that you have to use ACS exams to be an approved program to award certified degrees, it's not a connection. I will say this, in terms of exam development, they're developed by people like you. So if you're interested, I will do a plea for the company. go to their website and you can fill out a little form, and we'd be happy to consider you. And pretty much if you put your name down, we'll agree to have you until you tell us no and to take you off the list. And so it is a group of individuals that are sitting in the room making those decisions who consider things like this. The survey papers that are acknowledged here was when Barb was actually a chair of both the senior level, the upper level inorganic one, and then when they were first inventing the foundation level one, she was the person on the ground. They did that survey work as part of it, so they can kind of tailor the exam. So I know that the committees in the past, during my tenure at the Exams Institute, used those as frameworks to think about topics. So I'm sure that a document like this will be in the hands of people writing those exams. Um, but ultimately, it's faculty who make that decision. ACS exams facilitates the process. If not enough people are not actually teaching the content, then it gets flagged as a bad question and it doesn't appear on the final type thing. So if you are an institution that uses it, I encourage you to be a part of the trial exam process because that'll help weed out topics when it comes to that. The last thing I'll say is that the scoring that we provide takes that into account because we know for PChem, inorganic, biochem, all of those kind of for sure, to a certain extent, instrumental analysis. We know that not everybody has those, and so it's kind of built into the norms that we provide with it. So we kind of take care of it. But my secret little thing on the side is volunteer to be on the exam committee, and then you get to see the inside and all of the inner workings, and it will make a different kind of sense to you. But I do not speak for the brand or the company.
And I will say, as someone who's served on multiple exam committees, not just for inorganic chemistry, it is a fantastic learning experience and just a fantastic experience interacting with faculty from across the country. And I was never employed by that brand.
But once you see how the sausage is made, you can't unsee it.
You can't unlook.
Yeah, my problem is now I just want to see how other sausage is made.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there other questions while we're paused for questions? Love the questions. All right. I guess it's time to move on to lab experiences. I'm up this time, aren't I, Cora?
Yep, it's your
Yeah.
go.
You left me the long one. Yeah. So again, this is getting away from that old list of these are felt like a million experiments that you could possibly do in your inorganic course. And I think that the second paragraph, the first and second paragraph really define it. The second paragraph is more the philosophy. It's to give students those opportunity to build the skills we want them to have as scientists, to design experiments, to analyze data, to reason chemically, to think critically, to solve problems. And then also the manipulative and characterization skills that they typically develop in a laboratory experience. That's really the center of this. It is system agnostic. We do point out that molecular chemistry has historically been an approach. We think it should include a diverse range of materials because inorganic material deals with everything from small molecules to the nano, the meso, the extended scale. In the inorganic chemistry lab is a great place to do that. The other thing that we have in here as part of a philosophy is that the idea that the lab experience ideally will have open-ended or incompletely defined questions. So students aren't just doing a verification lab, but that they're also developing their skills to troubleshoot and to deal with unfamiliar situations. And so there's a suggestion, but not a requirement to get away from the individual, like you do a lab this week, you do a lab this week, but to go to multi-week labs where students can keep revising ideas, build on findings and things like that. In terms of the structure, again, the inorganic lab is all over the place. And this is even assuming institutions have an inorganic lab because in the guidelines, students have to be exposed to 4 different areas. And I think the most frequent one for the one that they're not exposed to is either inorganic or biochem. I don't know which one wins, so wins there, but so there's a strong suggestion that they have an inorganic lab, but there's no requirement in the guidelines that they do have that lab. Sometimes they're combined with other lab experiences. So my institution combines the inorganic and the organic laboratory. There are lots of different combinations. Some institutions have standalone courses. Some have special topics labs, like a materials chemistry lab or a bioinorganic chemistry lab. And then there's a comment on the instrumentation for the course. We have from some survey data about the most common techniques, NMR, IR, UV-Vis, and magnetic susceptibility, which tend to be small molecule techniques. So there's just a general statement that incorporate instrumentation. Here's what people use. Consider thinking more broadly about your classes of materials. And so that's a short summary of the laboratory experiences. I don't know if there are questions, comments. Cora, did I forget anything?
No, you did a great job.
So I do have a question here. Inorganic chemists, we tend to be the ones that like to work outside of normal atmosphere. Is there any push towards having a lab that would encourage slink technique or glove box technique, anything like that? Or is it just kind of left up to what your resources are?
I think it's very much left up towards what your resources are. I don't think we've mentioned specific inert atmosphere techniques in here at all. We were just trying to get away from requirements to do specific things, because it is such a broad and diverse field. And if that's appropriate at your own institution, you should advocate for it at your own institution. And I think they're important skills, but I don't know that we want to require any of these.
Thank you.
Great question, though. And so the last thing we want, and this is really key, I think, in sort of our goal to move away from being prescriptive with the supplements and try rather to provide resources for folks. So the last part is really resources for designing inorganic chemistry courses and different models of coverage. And what we wanted to do is we want to include a comprehensive list of resources that people might draw from. These include resources that were developed in consultation with the inorganic community, in community workshops, through some of the surveys about content information, the anchoring concepts work. And we wanted to include resources that describe different methods of teaching inorganic chemistry, both inorganic chemistry lecture courses and laboratory courses. And we wanted to include different frameworks. So we talk about the Journal of Chemical Education, the virtual inorganic, we talk about Viper, and then we list some resources. And some of you probably know these resources very well. But if there are other resources that you've come across that you think are particularly useful, or you think we should definitely include to practitioner, for people who are teaching inorganic chemistry and thinking about the inorganic curriculum, or for people who may be thinking about revisions to their inorganic curriculum, please do share those resources so we can be sure to include them in this supplement and get it out to the community.
Yeah, and these resources that Cora is talking about are meant kind of to get at the course design level, not at the specific topic level. Just for what would you think about if you were putting together an inorganic course? And so that's something I think people can ponder. And I put a link for the feedback form, or a conversation on the Discord would be very appropriate. And I can report that conversation out, because it would be nice to get definitely some feedback. But I had a couple questions that I wanted to ask and get a broader perspective on. The first one is just kind of your opinions or thoughts on whether this document helps address the competencies that students should have coming out of the inorganic course, not the topics. We are topic agnostic, but the competencies that we want of our students and kind of the philosophy and values we have in the inorganic course. And this is something that you can ponder for a longer period of time too. Cora, I know we have a deadline for the feedback because this is something we are going to be talking about in the near future. I want to say it's like the first week of March. So you don't have an infinite amount of time to ponder, but you do have some time to ponder.
Yeah, ultimately, we want to share this with the full committee and get these done, right? But we welcome any and all feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess another question, I'm just going to toss out some questions and I can put these in the Discord chat as well. Maybe that's a good strategy. Is there anything that you think has been omitted from this or problems with something that's been included in here? I'll take silence as we need to think a little bit longer, and that's okay. Then another one of the questions that I had, do you foresee any challenges because of the nature of this document being much more philosophical? Do you think that's going to create a challenge for your ability to teach your inorganic or lecture or lab course as you envision it being appropriate for your own institution?
I enjoy that I'm on a call with someone who doesn't identify themselves as an inorganic chemist. So Michelle, I see you because I'm an organic chemist. So this question may be coming out from someone who's not in the field. Philosophically, I read this very much into the values of there are a lot of ways in which you can do inorganic. And so I'm trying to think about all of you all that I work with in the inorganic space, the folks in my own institution, and I'm hard pressed to think about someone teaching an inorganic course who wouldn't fulfill this or what is it 80% of the way. To get 80% of the way, then you can have the check mark. Like I actually do feel really comfortable. And then my little side thing is that I'm not in depth enough in the organic community to know if they're even debating this around or one of these exists. But in that one, I actually want to see a section which is here are the things that you should admit. But I know that's not a value of this community. With that kind of thing. So I actually, from an outsider's perspective, get the philosophical perspective of it, and it seems to be very welcoming about, hey, we know there's a lot of things you do already. So maybe my question back is there any motivation from the committee to be more prescriptive in some areas and say, hey, here's kind of a core that everybody does need to teach? But that,
I
that's
don't see that coming down the pike, but
I'm an outsider, so I'm just asking that question.
no, it's good. I laugh because we have this debate frequently, so I'm laughing because it comes up quite often. It's kind of like we want to say here are some basic things that need to be included in X class, right? So, but trying to narrow down what those things are in a community can be really difficult because we don't want the 26 people on CPT to make those decisions. You really want to have the entire community having a discussion about it. And that can become very messy very quickly. I Our goal is we want to we want to give agency to the departments to be able to be creative in the ways that they see fit for the students that they have in their classrooms. And that may mean that the curriculum shifts a bit because of the people that are taking the classes, the students that are there, their interests, their goals, where they're going to go afterwards. So we really try and believe me, we walk up to that edge all the time and say, we should tell them analytical has to be this, 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 and this, right? But and I'll use that because it's not the inorganic world, right? Analytical has to be A, B, C, D, and E, but analytical is taught in a very different way across the entire 700 or so schools that are teaching analytical. So great question. I laugh because it's one that comes up all the time, and it's not as though we say we're not doing this ever. We always keep it there. But I think that trying to make a one size fits all basic level, I mean, even with the ABIOP, we get pushback because, again, like I said, analytical is the problem child there because people teach it very differently in very different ways. And a lot of people teach it throughout the curriculum instead of with a dedicated quant class. So that's my little 2 cents on the. Did you think I have reflected the discussions we've had in the committee room?
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing is, and I think this is especially true for inorganic, like I would say students should talk about chemical bonding somewhere in their undergraduate curriculum. It might be in an organic course. It might be in a different course. You might do a really good job in some other area and you cover different things. So I think the one thing that we do say very strongly is it's not general chemistry. So, but beyond that, for coverage, it's, yeah, can be all over. I'm glad you found them welcoming.
So I think we've touched on this fact a number of times that, with what am I counting here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us here. That's probably 6 different versions of inorganic out there. So I'll try to cut to the chase and say, my specific situation. Ultimately, the question is going to boil down to this, or the statement is going to be, well, we'll see what you folks think when our next review comes up. Realistically, right? But I had a stupid system of foundation inorganic class with a lab attached, but students could opt to take it without the lab for the same number of credits. Dumb. And if it was made into a class that had only a lab attached, I would not be able to run it on a regular basis. It would disappear. So we got rid of the lab. And it became a cure in our curriculum that I seem to be involved with no chance of escaping. So it's going to have inorganic components, and again, we'll see what happens during our next review. But there's going to be a bunch of unique, different situations out there because we are unique individuals, and I feel bad for Kyle because he's always got to deal with I'm on quarters, which seems to get ignored in many things, but is realistic.
Yeah,
think-
I mean, to give you an example, at my first job, I was half of chemistry and all of physics. And so I had to teach an inorganic course, and I'm a physical chemist, and but I taught it from the standpoint of basically metalloenzyme stuff. I taught it from the photosynthesis world because that was what I knew. That's the inorganic that I did. And so I had to use the expertise I had. I would have loved to have some kind of a document to say, hey, these are some basic things, or these are the things that are commonly taught in this class. I wouldn't have to teach those, but at least it would give me some kind of direction in that way. And I think that what we're doing, or what we're trying to do, is we're trying to center people in those situations, right? So a hardcore inorganic chemist coming in to teach inorganic chemist, I think they have in chemistry, they have a good idea of what they're going to teach. It's the people that are coming in with slightly different backgrounds that are the closest to inorganic that you have, that would benefit from this. And I think that's kind of how we center these documents.
I think that's a great way to frame that approach. Yeah.
Barb, I think you and Cora hinted at this. So this is a topic of discussion at the spring ACS meeting around that time period, and then will we see something like this appear soon after?
I'm trying to figure out how to do that, and work around the machinery here. I have some ideas, but it would require that we have a certain number of supplements done in the spring so that I'm not just putting one little one on the website. But I have an idea. I have a bigger, longer term plan, but I don't think I'm going to get the support, the web support I need to do that. I'll program the damn page myself if I have to. I mean, but I have to have this page to start. So I'm hoping that we can, but it will depend on, right now we have analytical, MSN, inorganic probably will be done. I don't know where we are in physical and biochem, but those are the other ones that are out there. And organic is 80% done. So
I was going to say, I think that organic is well on its way.
yeah.
And I thought that physical had made progress.
I just know I wrote the first 3/4 of it, and then the last quarter has been sitting there for a while. I gave up after that. I'm like, that's enough physical chemistry for me. I haven't been teaching it. I haven't taught that in 8 years at least.
Well, we appreciate everybody's time, and we really welcome you to sit. You have, hopefully you have the links to the document, you have the links to the feedback form. Sit on it, think about it. We will take, as Barb said, we said pretty much around the first week of March. At the end, like March 8th through 10th would be great to have this feedback so we can work on it and get a draft together to share with our colleagues at the spring ACS meeting.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks
Thank you.
for facilitating, Chip.
Thank you.
Oh, we were happy to have you. It was a great presentation and interesting discussion. Barring any other questions, I would like to thank Barb, Cora, and Michelle again for spending some time with us. Really great. Again, we'll get the recordings out as soon as possible in their various formats, and look forward to another SLiTHER in April that hopefully Kyle remembers what he's talking about because I've forgotten. Yeah, he'll come up with it. I have faith. So with that, thanks everyone.